You were the black sheep judge then. Can I say that? During that time, people must look at you and like.
No. Well, there were a few. There were a few judges. You see, the government was under increasing pressure to appoint as judges also people who opposed the apartheid system, and that was because of the international pressure on South Africa. And the South African apartheid government wanted to demonstrate that it had an independent judiciary. So it had to go on appointing some judges, even though they were against the apartheid system.
So to have people like you. And then in 1991, you were asked by Nelson Mandela, back then the ANC chairman, to head the Commission of Inquiry regarding the prevention of public violence and intimidation. Quite a long name. Did you feel that you were taking on an uphill task?
Yeah, it was a very difficult task because there was a lot of violence going on in South Africa. Black people were killing black people, and it was Nelson Mandela's view that the reason was that the white police and army was causing the violence in order to avoid democracy and to continue the apartheid system. And the South African government, under the leadership of President de Klerk, denied that. And this was referred to as black on black violence, as if this is what black people do, and it got worse and worse, and eventually this commission of inquiry was set up with the agreement of all the parties to the negotiations, and we were after 2 years of investigations we were able to prove we found evidence, documentary evidence, in the Department of Defense. Proving that it was the army and the police that was really instigating the violence.
What happened during that time in South Africa? How come there are blacks and whites, there are issues, and then blacks against blacks as well?
Right. Well, it was very complex. Obviously, politics is always complicated, never simple, and but here you had enmity between Mandela's supporters of the African National Congress and Chief Buthelezzi's supporters, mainly from the Zulu people, the Inkatha Freedom Party, and evil members of the white establishment were using that enmity to create violence in the community.
Oh, I see. So what did the Goldstone Commission do? Gather information?
We gathered information, and eventually we got information that the violence was being instigated in a particular area, and we were able, it's a long story, but we were able, by tracing a credit card, we were able to establish that the people involved came from a large organization, and I had unusual powers. I had my own investigators, South African and European investigators, and I was able to send them into a large office building in Pretoria and to seize files, and it turned out that was the department in military intelligence, and the files we seized established that Mandela was correct, that there was what was called a third force instigating the violence.
What did the findings lead to eventually?
We made our findings public. President de Klerk was still the head of state, and he dismissed 28 senior members, including many generals in the army, because they were involved in this third force. And that really brought it to an end. It stopped the violence.
I think one very important point about you is that you can gain the respect of all sides in South African society, opposing sides as well.
Right.
How did you do that?
Well, really by demonstrating as a judge that I was not on one side or the other, but on the side of truth and on the side of justice and morality, and very strongly against racial oppression. And that was the fact that was possible was, of course, very important, that South Africa was able to handle its own transition. We didn't have to rely on foreign people intervening. We were able, black and white South Africans, there were sufficient black and white South Africans able to manage the transition to democracy.
Now, South Africa is successful in bridging people with different ideas. Thailand is facing crisis as well. We have different strong political views. How did South Africa do it, bridge people together?
You know, I think there's a lot of there was a lot of tolerance in our society, and good leaders. I think leadership's essential. We were very blessed in South Africa by having Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk. De Klerk was particularly showed wonderful leadership in getting his own people to give up power after 350 years of oppression. And that took tremendous courage because we live on the southern tip of a black continent, and white South Africans had tremendous fear that if power was in the black majority, that they would be kicked out, that everything they'd acquired would be taken away from them. So it took tremendous courage and leadership for de Klerk to get his own people to agree to give up power to a black majority. And Nelson Mandela's great brilliance was that he was able to convince white South Africans that blacks didn't want revenge. They wanted a non-sexist and a non-racial free democracy. And that really, it was those two leaders that led their people into a comparatively peaceful negotiation period.
There were no revenge at all?
There were no acts of, apart from this political violence. It was a very easy transition. Black people moved into what were white areas, and there was never any violence. And I think, you know, all people act in their self-interest. And fortunately in South Africa, it was in the interest of people to get on well together.
On the individual level, how do you get people to come together, that we are of the same country?
Again, you know, it's following good leaders. I know of no other substitute. It doesn't just happen. It needs people of goodwill to convince other people that this is the way to, this is the moral and the self-interest way to go.
So you give credit to the leadership.
Yep.
To the leadership.
Absolutely.
Are there any other factors?
Well, I think there are. I think the fact that black South Africans almost miraculously didn't hate. I found that as a young South Africa growing up in apartheid South Africa. My wife and I like walking, and we would go for walks around the lake in Johannesburg, and there are a lot of black people, and we found if we greeted them, we get a very friendly greeting back. And I learned that there was anger and frustration, but there was no hate, and I think that's very important.